My name is Rachel. I'm 26 years old, born and raised in a small town in Pennsylvania, and for most of my life, I've done everything my family expected of me. I graduated college with honors, took care of my younger siblings when mom was working late, and even stayed local when all I wanted was to move to New York and chase something. Anything that felt like mine. But nothing quite prepared me for the moment when a family vacation became a personal wake-up call. Before I dive into everything that happened, I want to ask you something. If you've ever felt like the underdog in your own family, like your voice is always the quietest in the room, then I hope you'll subscribe to this channel. Here I share real emotional stories that might just sound a lot like your own. And by subscribing, you won't just follow my journey. You'll find something deeper. A space where being overlooked doesn't mean being unimportant. We post new stories every week that make you feel seen. You deserve that. Now back to that moment. Started with a group text from mom. We're planning the family trip for June. Cancun, all-inclusive, 5 nights. Flights are $1,200 each. If you can't afford it, stay behind. That was it. No, how's everyone doing? No, is this doable for you, Rach? Just a command, followed by a warning. My heart sank when I read it. I stared at the screen, the fluorescent lights of the office flickering above me, the keyboard cold under my fingers. Everyone else in the family group chat responded within minutes. Booked. So excited. Finally, some beach time. I'm in. Just sent Dad my flight confirmation. I said nothing. Because I couldn't afford it. Not easily anyway. My rent had just gone up, and I was still paying off my student loans. I worked in nonprofit communications. Fulfilling, yes, but it wasn't exactly a goldmine. I'd been living paycheck to paycheck for the past 6 months, scraping by and telling myself things would get better soon. But Mom's message didn't leave room for vulnerability. In our family, you kept up or you stayed behind. That was the rule. I remember sitting on my lunch break, just staring at my coffee, lukewarm and bitter, feeling like I was 13 again and had forgotten my permission slip for the school field trip. Everyone else was going. I was going to be left behind. And then something snapped. Not loudly. Not in some cinematic, dramatic way. But quietly, deep in my chest. I pulled up my bank app, checked my balance, and winced. I could swing it, barely. If I ate ramen for 2 weeks and delayed my car maintenance another month. I looked up flights. Most were in the $1,100 to $1,300 range. Coach seats, layovers in Dallas or Miami. But then I saw it. 1 seat left. First class. Nonstop. $1,670. It was stupid. Irresponsible. Probably reckless. Booked it. And I didn't tell anyone. Not my mom. Not my sister. Not even my best friend. If I was going to be treated like an outsider for not measuring up, I figured I might as well start acting like one. On my own terms. At the time, I had no idea how much that one decision would change things. Not just for the trip, but for how I saw myself. For how I understood my family. And for what I was finally ready to stop tolerating. But before any of that unfolded, I had to walk through that airport, suitcase in hand, head held high, while pretending I didn't care what they thought. And trust me, I cared. So much more than I wanted to admit.
He didn't sleep that night. Even after everyone left Grandma's house and Lucy and he curled up in our childhood beds, hers still covered in faded posters of early 2010's boy bands, Mine stripped down and unfamiliar, he couldn't shake the image of that man in the photo. The Veiha stood slightly behind Grandma, like a shadow you don't notice until it is too late. He stared at the ceiling in the dark, the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. Every creak of the old floorboards sent my thoughts spinning. And when he finally drifted off, he dreamed of Grandma sitting at the kitchen table, whispering something he couldn't quite hear, over and over again. By morning, he knew he couldn't leave this alone. While Lucy made coffee, he brought up the photo again. Let's find the letters, he said. She hesitated, spoon paused midair over her cup. Claire, they're probably gone. That was 15 years ago. You said you found them in the attic, right? She nodded slowly. In an old shoebox. With yellow ribbons. They were hidden behind a pile of Christmas ornaments. We climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, careful not to make too much noise. Dad was still asleep in the room below. The attic was exactly as he remembered it, dusty, cramped, filled with memories and outgrown. Boxes labeled Eclair Pet Th Grade Jenny Lucy, belly stuff lined on a wall. The smell of old fabric and cedar filled the air. We found the box within 20 minutes. Still tucked behind a bin of broken Christmas lights and garlands that hadn't seen daylight in years. Yellow ribbons. Just like Shade said. Inside were maybe a dozen envelopes, all slightly curled at the edges, stained with time but still intact. The handwriting was neat, almost too neat, like someone trying very hard to be careful. They were all addressed to Alice D., Grandma. Lucy looked at me, hesitant. You surely should read these. She's gone, he said, my voice low. And she left them hidden. That man in the photo, this might be the only way we understand who Hae is. We sat cross-legged on the attic floor as the morning light filtered through the single, dusty window. He opened the first letter. The date was from 1987, before he was born. My dearest Alice. He stood outside your window again tonight. You look so peaceful, reading by the lamp, sipping your tea. He didn't knock. He never do. Boots on, OLL understand that you don't need to ask for permission. We belong to each other, even if they convinced you otherwise. He stopped reading. Jesus, he whispered. Lucy paled. Tehates da tone I remember. Obsessive. Possessive. We read 3 more letters. The messages varied, but the theme was always the same, watching, waiting, belonging. One of them even mentioned us, me and Lucy, though we oldn't have been born yet. You have a life now, with your daughter. But even she will one day know me. One day they all will. Lucy looked up sharply. I knew about Mom. I felt a cold shiver crawl down my spine. Our mother had died in a car accident when Lucy was just a baby. Grandma had raised us after that. She rarely talked about Mom's past, only that she had Claire young, that the father isn't in the picture, and that things had been complicated. It was always vague. Conveniently vague. He reached for the next envelope, but it was already torn open. The paper inside was different, crumpled, rushed. You think of one. But I'm still here. Watching. Always watching. And on a day, they'll all know who I am. There was no date. Just initials at the bottom, Jeduplove. He blinked. Jeduplove, he whispered. Does that mean anything to you? Lucy frowned. Wait. I think. She paused. I think he saw a name like that on one of the old family photos in the basement. Remember those big albums in the chest? With black pages and gold corners. We rushed downstairs. The basement was musty and dim, but the big wooden chest was still there, under a stack of board games and folded blankets. We opened it and pulled out the first heavy letterbund album. The photos were delicate, some falling out of their corners, most faded to sepia tones. We flipped page after page, past generations we barely recognized, until we landed on a wedding photo. A young woman, Grandma, unmistakably, in her early 20s, stood next to a tall, serious-looking man in a dark suit. On the corner of the photo, written in ink that had nearly faded away, Alice i Jonathan Whitmire 1966. Lucy inhaled sharply. Jeduplove, he said. But she never said she was married before, Lucy whispered. Grandpa Dan was her only husband. A isn't Hae? That was the story Ede always heard. Dan Dawson, our grandpa, who died before he turned 6. The man she always spoke of with love, nostalgia, and a touch of sadness. The man whose photo sat beside her bed for decades. Then who the hell was Jonathan Whitmer? Lucy flipped through the album again, no more photos of him. It was like he vanished after that page. I don't get it, as she said. Why would she erase him? And why do his letters sound like stalking? I felt a deep discomfort settle in my chest. Something about this isn't just sad. It was dangerous. That photo on the mantel, Grandma had placed it there recently. Maybe even just weeks before her death. Was she trying to send a message? Or was he back? We stared at each other in the darkened basement, the weight of the mystery thick between us. Whatever secrets Grandma took to her grave, they aren't staying buried.
By late afternoon, the house had quieted down. Most of the relatives had returned to their hotels or homes, and only a few casserole dishes and folded chairs remained as evidence of the earlier flood of people. Dad had gone for a walk, needing space, and Lucy had crashed on the couch with a blanket pulled over her face. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the photo on the mantel again. That man. Now we had a name, Jonathan Whitmore. A man Grandma had apparently married in the 60s and never spoken of again. A man whose letters suggested something darker than heartbreak. A man whose image, uninvited and almost hidden, appeared in a recent photo with Grandma in the backyard. I pulled out my phone and opened Google. Jonathan Whitmore, Virginia, I typed, then narrowed it down. Jonathan Whitmore, Richmond, 1966. I wasn't expecting much. That name wasn't exactly rare. But something caught my eye on page 2 of the search results. A Scan newspaper article from 1970, hosted on a genealogy forum. Click. Local man missing. Jonathan Whitmore, 31, has been reported missing after his wife, Alice Whitmore, filed a police report. Friends and neighbors say the couple had been going through a difficult separation. No evidence of foul play was found. Case remains open. My blood went cold. So he didn't just disappear from the family album. He vanished, literally. Reported missing. By Grandma. I scrolled down. There was a grainy photo attached to the article. The man had the same angular jaw, the same piercing eyes. It was him. The man in the background of that backyard photo. I didn't know what scared me more. That he'd disappeared 55 years ago, or that he had somehow reappeared in a photo taken just a few years back. I sent the link to Lucy, then walked outside, needing air. The sky was gray, the way it gets before a summer storm in Virginia. Thick clouds with a humidity that clings to your skin. I walked into the backyard, to the exact spot where the photo had been taken. The old picnic table was still there. Though the wood was more warped now, the bench cracked. I sat down. "Grandma," I whispered. "What the hell happened?" Sound behind me made me turn. A step. On gravel. I stood quickly, heart racing. It was an older man, probably in his 70s, walking slowly up the driveway with a brown blazer and a cane. His hair was mostly white, his posture stiff. But his face. I'd never seen him before. But something about his presence sent my instincts into high alert. He noticed me watching and gave a slight nod, like he belonged here. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He stopped just short of the porch steps. "I'm here for Alice," he said softly. "She passed," I replied, not moving. "The funeral was this morning." "I know," he said. Silence stretched between us. "Who are you?" finally asked. He looked at me with eyes so sharp they felt like they could cut through me. "A friend," he said. Then added, "From long ago." "Name?" He paused, then smiled, a tight, unreadable expression. "You wouldn't remember me. I knew your grandmother before you were born." I didn't like this. Not one bit. But I didn't want to escalate, not alone. "Excuse me," I said, stepping inside quickly and locking the door behind me. Lucy sat up when she saw my face. What happened? There's a man outside. Says he came to see Grandma. Says he knew her from before. She stood alarmed. What does he look like? I described him. Her face went pale. That's him, she said. That's the guy from the photo. We both peered through the front window. But he was gone. Not walking down the driveway. Not on the porch. Just vanished. My heart thudded. Claire, Lucy said, almost breathless. How is that even possible? I didn't answer. Couldn't. Instead, I pulled out the newspaper article again. Read the lines over and over. Missing. Never found. No evidence of foul play. But Grandma had never told us. Never warned us. And now he was back. Her house. After her funeral. That night I dug deeper. I went back into Grandma's room. Her private space that always felt sacred. The floral wallpaper, the porcelain angel on the nightstand, the perfectly folded quilt. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. But the drawers, those were locked. I found a small key in her jewelry box. Inside the drawer were 3 things. An old cassette tape, a worn journal, and a folded letter addressed to Claire and Lucy. My hands shook as I opened the letter. My girls, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And something tells me the past is already resurfacing. I never meant to leave you with questions, but I feared the truth would do more harm than silence. Yes, I was married before. To a man named Jonathan Whitmore. He was charming, intelligent, and deeply disturbed. He watched me, followed me, said we were meant to be, even after I begged him to leave. One night he disappeared. I never knew how. I never told the police everything. I was scared not just of him, but of what might happen if he came back. I believe he's been near. I saw someone watching the house last month. If he's returned, I need you to be careful. He's dangerous. There's more on the tape. Love you always, Grandma. I stared at Lucy, who had gone completely still. We plugged in the cassette player we found in the back of the closet. Clicked play. Her voice, soft, older, a little shaky, filled the room. If you're listening to this, sorry. I should have told you sooner. But what happened that night in 1970? It changed everything. Lucy grabbed my hand. We listened. And what Grandma confessed next was worse than we ever could have imagined.
The sound of Grandma's voice on the cassette made her feel heavier. Every word she spoke carried decades of fear, regret, and something else he called a quiet name, maybe shame. Lucieni sat cross-legged on the floor of her room, the tape recorder resting between us on the carpet, our faces lit only by the dim yellow lamp on Grandma's nightstand. As her voice filled the room, the outside world seemed to disappear. There was only her, and us, and the truth she had waited so long to tell. I need to start with the truth. Jonathan and I were never a real marriage. Not really. My parents pressured me into it. I was charming at first, God, I could talk anyone into anything. But there was something off about him. I saw it early on, before we were even married. But by then, I felt trapped. Grandma's voice trembled. We heard her inhale shakily before continuing. The first time I followed me to work, I thought it was sweet. The second time, I knew it isn't. I never raised a can to me, but I never let me breathe, either. I said things that made no sense, like how I could see our future, how our children would be chosen, how we belonged to him in this life and beyond. I said while looking right through me, like he isn't even there. Lucy and I exchanged a look. It was worse than we thought. On a night in July 1970, I told him I was leaving. He said he wanted a divorce. I left. Told me he'd never get away. That he'd never let me belong to anyone else. That if I couldn't take me in life, he'd find me in death. Grandma's voice cracked. That night, I broke into the house. He'd locked the doors. He'd even called my cousin June to come stay with me, just in case. But I got in. Through the basement window. I could picture it. The same basement I'd just been in. The same house. It made my skin crawl. I cornered me in the kitchen. June tried to get between us. I shoved her. I grabbed the cast iron skillet from the stove. She stopped. There was a long pause on the tape. Just breathing. I hit him. Once. Then twice. Then. I don't know. I fell. Hard. I isn't moving. My stomach twisted. I panicked. June was in shock. We didn't call the police. We buried him. In the woods behind the old mill road. We told ourselves it was self-defense. But we knew the law might not see it that way. I reported him missing a few days later, just like nothing had happened. No one ever found the body. And he never told us all. Until now. Lucia's mouth was open, but no sound came out. He reached forward and hit pause. We sat in silence. She killed him, Lucy whispered. I shook my head slowly. No. She survived him. But she buried him, Claire. She kept that secret for 50 years. The cassette clicked softly, still cafe true. We have to hear the rest, he said. He pressed play again. He thought it was over. He started over. He met Daniel. We raised your mother. Then you too. But something never felt finished. Sometimes at night, I'd wake up certain I heard his voice. Certain I saw someone in the trees. But I thought it was just guilt. Until last year. Lucy gripped my hand. I saw him. At the grocery store. Not young, older. Wrinkled. But those eyes. That same chilling smile. I don't know how it is possible. I can't explain it. But I swear to God. Jonathan Whitmer is alive. Lucy gasped audibly. If he comes back, we need to protect each other. Don't trust strangers. Don't ignore your instincts. And whatever you do, don't go to the old mill road. Click. The tape ended. Lucy and I stared at the player, as if willing it to start up again. As if more answers might pour out. She buried him, Lucy repeated. I was dead. I had to be dead. He nodded slowly. And yet we both saw him. In that photo. In the driveway. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then he said something he hadn't meant to say out loud, if we should go to the mill road. Lucy turned to me, eyes wide. Claire, no. Didn't you hear her? That was the only thing she said not to do. Exactly, he said. Which means that whatever is buried there, she still feared it. After all these years. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. And maybe I had. But I couldn't just sit there. I needed to know. An hour later, flashlight in hand, we were driving out of town in Dad's old pickup. The night was quiet, the hairlets cutting through the thick summer air. The dirt road to the mill was overgrown, barely visible between the trees. I don't think this is smart, Lucy muttered. I know, I said. But it is the only way I'll know if she really buried him. If what we saw was even possible. We reached the edge of the woods, just past the old sign for Whitmer Mill, ironic, and chilling, now that we knew the name's history. We followed the narrow trail Grandma had described in the letter, 20 steps past the third tree with the orange bark, then left toward the ridge. That is when we saw it. A patch of disturbed dirt. Fresh. Lucia's voice was almost inaudible. Claire Osomon has been here. Recently. He knelt down. The soil was loose. Turned over. Not 50 years ago. More like yesterday. Then, behind us, a twig snapped. We turned. A figure stood just beyond the trees. Watching. Older. Taller than he remembered. But with eyes that pierced through the dark like glass under moonlight. Jonathan Whitmer. Alive. Or something very, very close to it. We didn't move. The flashlight trembled in my hand, its beam slicing through the night and catching his figure between the trees. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just watched us. Lucy was breathing hard beside me, her hand gripping my wrist so tightly it hurt. Claire, as she whispered, he ran. But he couldn't, not yet. Who are you? He demanded, my voice stronger than he expected. The man stepped forward. Slowly. Deliberately. I am the past, I said, his voice low and smooth. And I've been digging various hidden. Lucy yanked my arm. We have to go. We backed away, our feet unsteady in the soft earth. But I didn't follow. Just stood there, as if I knew that fear alone would chase us farther than his footsteps ever could. Back at the house, we locked every door, every window. My hands were shaking as he called the sheriff's office. Lucy kept pacing, muttering that none of this made sense. And it didn't. But the man in the woods was real. I'd seen him. Heard him. And I was done doubting myself. When the deputy arrived, we told him everything. Not the tape. Not the burial. Just the man, the threats, the photo. Enough to justify concern without dragging Grandma's ghost through the court system. They said they patrol the area. Told us to stay indoors. Said they never had any record of a Jonathan Whitmer in the area in decades. Officially, the deputy added, he had vanished in 1970. That case is still open, technically. But cold as ice. We didn't sleep that night. By morning, Lucy wanted to leave. He didn't blame her. But he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he went back to the attic. He needed to find something. Some thread to pull. And he did. Behind a panel of insulation, tucked into the wall, was another box. Inside were photos, dozens of them. All of Grandma. Some old. Some recent. All taken from a distance. Lucy stared at them, horrified. He has been watching her. For years. There were timestamps on the backs. 2004-2012. On from just last summer. He never stopped. He called the sheriff again. This time, he handed over the photos, the letters, the tape. He told them everything. Grandma's confession, the man in the woods, the grave behind the mill road. It was like lighting a fire. Within 24 hours, detectives were swarming the property behind the old mill. The soil where they stood, where it knelt, was dug up with thorough and precision. They didn't find a body. But they found bones. Animal bones. Clean. Arranged. Like someone had staged it. He knew the come, he told Lucy. He knew exactly how to scare us. The case was reopened. Grandma's name was cleared. But Jonathan Whitmer, if that was his name, vanished again. No fingerprints. No address. No records. Nothing. It was like chasing a ghost. But on a thing changed. We aren't afraid anymore. We started talking, Lucieni, really talking. About mom. About grandma. About all the things we never asked, never understood. We went through every box, every journal. We found pieces of a woman far more complex than I'd ever known. A woman who had survived something terrifying and chose silence over shame. I came back to Chicago changed. I keep one of Grandma's letters framed above my desk now. The last line always sticks with me. We are more than what happens to us. We are what we do after. It has been months now. Sometimes I still feel like someone is watching me on quiet nights. But I don't run anymore. I document everything. I write. I speak. I protect the story Grandma never got to tell. And maybe, in doing that, I protect someone else, too. Because monsters don't always live in the shadows. Sometimes they walk in daylight. Unnoticed. Unquestioned. Until someone finally stops being afraid to speak.